Welcome to On a Way, a podcast about grief and loss. Beryl Botman is my name. Good day. Speaking about psychics doesn't come naturally to me. The way I've been brought up, my understanding or even my knowledge was very limited. And whatever I knew was really taboo. It was negative, it was evil, and sometimes even I understood it to be linked to witchcraft. So I had no personal relationship with this notion of psychic and what it means to be a psychic or what it means to have any encounter with a psychic. Fortune telling is another concept that I would have been familiar with in my youth. But fortune telling is knowing or speculating of what is to be. And we were brought up that it's not really our place to want to know anything deeper or anything regarding to the future. We have to accept our fate. We have to live with what we have. So my introduction to psychics was accidental, really. At the time, I was a listener that tuned in quite regularly to a radio station called P4 Radio at the time. And for an extended period, I was captured by a weekly slot in one of the afternoon shows where a psychic was available to react to listeners who called in, and he would give them a telephonic reading. For a very extended period, I listened to this. I learned to identify with the listeners, the kinds of questions that they asked. They had to choose numbers or they had to choose a color or, and very particularly, an area of life that they wanted some insight into. Like the areas of life that could choose as example, finances or career, family life or love matters. And so many of these issues that the listeners raised resonated with me. I could identify with it. But what really impressed me was how the psychic really tuned into the listeners. And I became aware of that because the kinds of issues that he would raise out of just them saying they want some insight into their finances, he would raise issues that is particular in their lives. And every single time they agreed with the issue that he raised. And that engrossed me. So for me, my understanding of psychics began to change. It was not as much fortune telling as really dealing with your life issues and questions. What are the questions that you're living, grappling with? What are the issues? What are the problems that you are struggling with? What is it that you need guidance with to interpret your life and your life actions and how this can lead to you acting upon it? So I began to see things differently. Like some listeners called in to say how they not only identified with the reading, but how things actually came to pass, happened as guided by the psychic. So having had that extended period of listening, I became more interested. I understood that being a psychic is having the ability to see the unseen. For them, it's in plain sight. Approaching a psychic sort of drives you to confront and identify your personal burning issues. This particular psychic intrigued me, and so I read a little more about psychics, what they can do and what they can't do. And I understood that being psychic is a gift to be able to read somebody's psyche, somebody's spirit, somebody's soul. Like when any of us can see in someone close to us when something is wrong or that what that person is going to say. Sometimes we can complete somebody else's sentence. And I see that like being in touch with your soulmate, somebody really, really close to you. Being a psychic puts this at a grander and a deeper scale. So when did I take the first step closer to a psychic? I had issues in my life. I had questions that I was grappling with, and I thought maybe this would give me a deeper insight and maybe some guidance as to how to navigate those issues. So I was enticed, I was intrigued, I listened for a long time. I tuned in as often as possible. I was truly fascinated. So I spoke to Russell, my late husband, and he encouraged me. He himself wouldn't have gone, it was too alien for him. But with his knowledge, I went for a first reading. And my experience of the first reading was not really what I expected, because the initial or the start of the reading, it wasn't what I expected, because I actually didn't know what to expect. It was totally foreign to me. When I walked into the space where the reading was going to take place, a calmness, a sereneness overcame me. It felt good to be there. It was decorated differently to what I'm used to or what I've ever seen, but it was certainly not alienating. It was actually inviting. I was open. I decided to be honest and open myself up, willing to learn. I was comfortable to do that. As with the listeners, the conversation started, and because it was a personal encounter and not telephonic on the radio, I could ask him for insights in more than one. In fact, all of what my identified life areas were. His initial description of me, not knowing me from a bar of soap, me meeting him for the first time in person, said, "You are a woman of deep faith." And that struck me, not knowing what my belief systems were. And it struck me in a manner that made me even more alert to listen, to think what he is saying, and to respond. I could choose the different issues that I wanted him to look into me and respond to. What he read into my choices of the bones and the cards, I could really identify with. Apart from the questions that I asked and the areas and the people in my life that I identified, there was also people who just popped up, and he would say something about those people as well. That reading ended strangely for me as well. At the end of the reading, he related to me that there was an old man with grey hair who approached. Friendly, open, smiling face. And he asked me whether my father has passed, and I said no. He said it's a grey man, he's smiling, and he's giving me a kiss on the cheek. I thought that might be my father-in-law. He again said that it's a gentle, friendly approach. But he couldn't interact because that would require a separate appointment for a crossover. And I wasn't ready for that at all. Some of the reading came to pass. Some of it needed interpretation and reflection on my part, but came to pass all the same. After Russell's passing, I would say I was called to approach a psychic again. I've never been back. I think I was just too scared and too apprehensive to go back to hear what my father-in-law, as I thought him to be, has to say to me, and the crossover thing was just too scary, so I didn't do that. Russell did encourage me, but because I think he was just inquisitive, but I couldn't. I couldn't get myself to do that. So I think Russell called me to go for another reading. I wrote about this quite in detail in Without You. Do go and read it. He knew that I was open to it. It took some time for me to realize that this is what is happening to me. This is what he is trying me to understand, that I must go and see the psychic. And so this time I knew when it eventually dawned on me and I made an appointment for a crossover, because now my understanding changed. Now I want to actually speak to somebody on the other side, or somebody wants to speak to me from the other side. So I went for this crossover. I truly believed that Russell was trying to make contact with me. However strange that felt and might sound to anybody that I spoke to, I didn't actually speak to anybody about it. I just went for my reading. Might have spoken to my daughters, probably did. The introduction to that session was much more familiar because we went into a reading first. But before he started the reading, he made the remark that I am surrounded by a number of spirits. And this he saw in the cards: parent, grandparent, great grandparent. And then there was a card with like a man walking into the abyss. I'm immediately associated it with Russell. Then he started the reading and looked at all the different aspects of my life that I had identified while he was busy with the reading, still not yet gone into the crossover experience. This person, or this image of this man walking from or in a distance, became clearer and approached, and the psychic told me this person is approaching. He's kissing me and greeting me and saying how proud he is of me and how he loves me. And all I could do was listen, and the tears were just running down my face. I couldn't feel any contact. When he said he kissed me on my lips, I didn't feel it. I can honestly say there was no feeling at all. And all the questions and issues that I had come prepared for the crossover session, the questions that I wanted to ask Russell, was in my head and in my heart. I wanted Russell to speak to them, but I didn't get a chance because all those issues were already addressed during the reading and the messages that he passed from him through the psychic to me. So I never really got to speak to him. At the end of that, having been prepared with questions, but all these questions answered, when the psychic asked me if I have something to say to Russell, I was completely dumbstruck. I didn't know what to do, and I didn't say. I just continued crying. And then again, an old man with grey hair approached, and I identified the friendly man again as my father-in-law. He had a message of thanks to me, and that was so satisfying. And it gave me confidence in the knowledge that how I lived and how I loved meant something, and it was appreciated by the father of my husband. And so that meant a tremendous amount to me. So if you ask me if I would recommend seeing a psychic to anybody, then my outright answer would be no. I would not do that out of my own. I am acutely aware of the differing belief systems around the issue of psychic and also of crossing over or even of a life beyond the here and now as we know it. But if somebody asks me in a way that suggests that they are interested and I have to speak from my experience, then I would say I will recommend that. Quite recently, outside of my books and the psychic encounters that I had during the first 5 years after Russell passed, and all the other revelations of a life beyond the physical, into the spiritual world. Quite recently, I was approached by a person unknown to me with a message or some messages from Russell. And again, it was through Facebook Messenger. And we weren't friends. She didn't know me, I didn't know her. But she did say he must have known that she knows about me because she just recently read an article in one of the local daily newspapers. And so she knew about me, and he approached her with some messages. And her encouragement and having heard these very short messages from this person led me to consult a different psychic who also identified the kinds of life issues that I was dealing with at that particular time. This was a remote reading, so it was telephonic. It wasn't in person as the previous encounters. So it was different. It was different in some ways and very similar in other ways. Psychic guidance helped me to direct me on my way. You have been listening to Psychic Encounters on my podcast, On a Way with Beryl Botman. Walk tall, tell it all. You've been listening to On a Way with Beryl Botman. You can purchase my books online on Amazon, Take-A-Lot, and at bookstores like Exclusive Books, Bargain Books, independent bookstores, and Barnes & Noble internationally. To connect with me, please follow me on Facebook to learn more about my book launches and talks. You can write to me at beryl.botman60@gmail.com. Thank you for listening.